Hi all. We will explore in Chapter 3 the concept of nonverbal codes. In this chapter, we will learn how to list, explain, and give examples of nonverbal codes.
What is identity? It is a word that describes the relatively unchanging or stable set of perceptions or ideas that we hold about ourselves. And so when we think about nonverbal behaviors and identity, they are the basic building blocks of an individual's identity. Nonverbal behaviors indicate what we think our identity is. Let us now turn our attention to primary identity and sex roles. One of our primary identities is fitting into traditional sex roles. For example, being socialized to behave like boys and girls, men and women, is one of our earliest experiences. What are the influences on gender development? They include the nonverbal characteristics that help in gender identity over time. Examples include how much space we take up in public, when we need help, whether we act tough or accept it, the types of clothes we wear, and the facial expressions we use to reveal ourselves. Next, let us define sex. Sex is defined in biological terms. This includes genital, chromosomal, and hormonal displays of maleness and femaleness. In contrast, gender is a culturally defined understanding of what social behaviors are, generally believed to be representations of masculinity and femininity. When we talk about gender, we use a term called androgynous as representative of both masculinity and femininity. When we use the term undifferentiated, we refer to representations of neither masculinity nor femininity.
Now we will look at the displayed characteristic of race. Even before other impressions are formed, race is displayed. Usually, people feel that they are being seen for their race than anything else. The usual displays of racial heritage are skin or hair color, the roundness of one's eyes, general hair texture, and facial structure. The burden of racial stereotypes is that there is no biological basis for the many stereotypes associated with racial heritage. Unfortunately, many people must navigate their world with the additional burden of unwarranted perceptions of their behavior, character, biology, or ethics. There is also the unearned privilege of race. Unearned privilege based upon their racial heritage is an unjust gift for some people. We should note that a conversation on privilege brings up many feelings, thus it is an emotionally charged topic. While a person's participation in society is important to be known, the ways in which unequal power structures may have benefited people are also important to recognize. For example, white privilege for Caucasians in North America and male privilege that men often benefit from. There might be different perceptions of one's own racial identity, depending upon one's interactions. Thus, the perceptions of one's interaction partners can influence identity characteristics.
Culture is associated with one's national origin or racial background more than the combination of the various groups to which we belong. It influences identity beyond memberships. Often, cultural groups are located within a particular geographic region. Individual identity is influenced by the emergence of local ways of doing things. However, culture can create a wrong perception of identity. By trying to be humorous or by self-description using a stereotype, one might accidentally create a wrong perception of one's own identity. For example, in the rural area where Margie grew up, the terminology "daddy's little princess" to describe oneself had a totally different meaning than in her college, leading to misconceptions. What are the differences between extroverts and introverts? Extroverts are people who might look forward to an evening out at a large party, because they tend to get their energy from social interaction with a variety of others. Introverts, on the other hand, are people who likely prefer to recharge with a dear friend or loved one in a more personal context.
Here are some differences between personalities. For extroverts, they tend to display direct contact, an open body orientation, and engagingly forward smile. Introverts may seem unapproachable, and they may desperately want to leave when they have had their fill of interactions. For a different personality-driven identity, there is the Type A personality. These individuals are most likely to have researched and completed a class project early. Whereas a serial procrastinator is mostly busy figuring out when she or he needs to get home for the midnight deadline.
These traits have impact on experiences. Personality descriptors describe the general tendencies of an individual. Internalizing and identifying with personality and character traits is easy. Traits have both good and bad impact.
Individual experience has many aspects to which people may identify with, like a variety of interests and activities. It may also have varying degrees of identities, from strongly identifying with it to not giving that topic a second thought. About nonverbal messages, there are a variety of ways by which people send messages about their own personal identities. One can form an overall opinion based upon such behaviors. Nonverbal code refers to a category of communicative behaviors that have been grouped by nonverbal characteristics that they share. We can combine nonverbal codes into groups because, in any interaction, codes often occur alongside each other at the same time. We can also study codes separately. For instance, contact cues refer to haptic and proxemic codes, while time and place cues are chronemic and environment codes. Kinesics refers to movement and motion-based behaviors. There is a wide variety of behaviors, namely, facial expressions, a wide variety of illustrative gestures, and forms of communicating that use movement to send a message. Other forms of movements in kinesics include motion-based ways to regulate conversational flow, and the weird leg jiggling one does when one is excited. We also observe the unintentional conveying of messages, such as tapping one's leg in class, clicking the end of a ballpoint pen, or braiding a friend's hair on a long bus ride.
Proxemics involves communicating through the use of personal space and interpersonal distance. There are different ways to understand proxemics based on culture. Based upon their own cultural background and experiences, individuals have their own different understanding of personal space. Importantly, Edward T. Hall conceptualizes interpersonal distance by classifying the allowed approximate distances and the types of relationships.
Haptics is a nonverbal code that deals exclusively with touch. It covers all forms of messaging related to physical contact. For example, touch is one of the best ways to communicate both affection and aggression. Haptics is the earliest messages received by infants, the caretaking behaviors such as being burped or hugged or bathed as an infant. Our complex understanding of touch emerges over the course of the lifespan, including an understanding of appropriate or inappropriate touch. Indeed, in both personal and professional contexts, we develop ways to communicate via touch. Oculesics is the nonverbal code dealing with the use of one's eyes to send a message. One of the most important ways to indicate attention, affection, or a threat. For example, when Dominic wanted to let his teammate know that he was really upset with him, he stared at him angrily. Later, when he saw a former lover, he used eye contact to send a message of a very different sort. Oculesics is a way of perceiving the world around us. The perception of the world around us is significantly done by oculesic behaviors, as around 80% of our social information is received through sight. Vocalics focuses on how we express ourselves using both words and voice qualities. It is about understand intent and emotional state, the rate, pitch, vocal tone, vocal variety, and accent help in understanding the intent and emotional state of the partner.
We also use vocalics to navigate feelings and emotions. To understand the nonverbal components that accompany a verbal message can help navigate complicated feelings, emotions, and intentionally. For example, when Sarah called Aiko on the phone during a crisis, Aiko knew immediately that something was wrong. Even though Sarah only talked about inane stuff, Aiko could tell by the tone and pitch of Sarah's voice that she was having a rough time. Pressing Sarah to find out what happened, Aiko finally got Sarah to reveal that she had discovered that her boyfriend was lying about an alcohol addiction which Sarah didn't know how to handle. Therefore, Aiko was able to use her own vocalics to make sure that Sarah knew she was comforted and supported.
In terms of perception based upon one's looks, we perceive both ourselves and others, and constantly make judgments and assessments based upon physical appearance. Physical appearance is the nonverbal code that deals with our faces and bodies, our clothing, and the artifacts that we carry with ourselves. This code forms an important part of communication. For example, when Jorge first got to college as a new transfer student, he met some students during transfer orientation. He noticed a group of men and women hanging out while wearing t-shirts related to video game culture. An avid gamer himself, Jorge also paid attention to the fact that a bunch of those people looked genuine and relaxed. He felt comfortable approaching the group in order to try to make new friends as he asked about where to best get his video game fix. Environment is the setting in which we find ourselves has a surprisingly large influence on our messaging. The features of the communication context is the nonverbal code associated with our environment focuses. When we react to environmental features, we don't acquire the environment as a nonverbal code, we learn reactions to environmental features, discovering how to communicate across contexts. For example, Even a normally loud and outgoing person would fall silent upon walking into a large Catholic cathedral. The soaring ceilings and the dim lighting would immediately signal a sense of quiet reflection that was unusual. It was the environmental features that would signal that it was a place for calm reflection, and the person would respond accordingly. We should also pay attention to the cultural impact of the messaging. Environmental features may be impacted by the messaging that occurs in a variety of contexts, signaling cultural norms about behavior. These elements that impact communication are relatively difficult to change, requiring major renovation or construction. What are relatively easier to change include rearranging furniture or repainting a wall. Some things impact the communication environment in significant ways, however they may not seem like much. Lastly, moods and communication patterns are often associated with environmental features. Olfactics are the nonverbal code focusing on the sense of smell. There are many ways that we send messages using scent. For example, one might ensure that he smells fresh and clean throughout the day, either by using body spray or expensive body washes and colognes. One might also want to make sure that his home smells clean and welcoming, either by using vanilla extract or a variety of air fresheners and diffusers.
Chronemics are the nonverbal code dealing with issues of time. Even if we unintentionally deal with time, our use of time sends a definite message. A term we use is response latency, which refers to the amount of time that it takes to respond to someone. For example, one can get really annoyed if the other person never sees an intended message while the phone was charging. Or consider another example where a person who showed up a couple minutes late because of traffic was told that he missed his opportunity. However, for other people, being 5 minutes late is seen as right on time. Lastly, some people might like to make their appointments wait a few minutes before they see them, in an attempt to make themselves seem important. In summary, we have covered in this chapter the terms and definitions that we will use throughout the rest of the course.